the Bear cinematographer, Drew Wehde. Thank you so much for doing this. I just want to jump in right away with the penultimate episode review, which is just an incredible sequence. Most of the episode is in one take, no edits. But before that, you have this great montage of like Chicago and stuff, and it's the first time really the show does that. So I guess like, can you talk a little about that and like kind of your approach to that, like how that should look before getting into like the meat of the episode? And that was not supposed to be a pun, but it obviously was. I'm so sorry, but yeah.
The show feels very kind of isolated within the restaurant throughout the show. And so when 7 came around and Chris decided to turn into a oneer, he wanted to kind of allow the audience to gently begin the episode. And so it was a opportunity for us to kind of go back to the love we have of like John Hughes and the early Michael Mann and those kind of days of how they showed Chicago. And so we took the opportunity throughout the season to, anytime we were out on location, I would send my B camera out with an 11-1 and we would just shoot really beautiful slow zoom work throughout the city, knowing that we could build a kind of archival of work that might play in whatever episode they wanted to choose. And so 7 was a perfect opportunity for editorial to build out that kind of slow, beautiful intro into the city, and then put people into a full panic attack for the next 20 minutes or so.
So the thing I found remarkable about that episode, watching it back when it aired, obviously, and then like even now, is like you kind of almost are like lulled into not realizing that it's a oneer, right? Or like right away. Correct. Because of the way you're kind of doing it. And I guess so. How did just start from the top? Like why was that the right decision for that episode, right? Like why a oneer in there, and like how you kind of like started there and kind of built out, I guess.
It worked really naturally with the style of the script and the story that Chris wanted to tell for that episode. And it was the kind of, not stopping the real time of a restaurant opening and the tickets starting to come in and the chaos that came from that, and then realizing they completely messed up. And so I think, he saw it a couple of weeks beforehand. It never was initially planned during prep. And so when we were in the middle of 3 and 4 episode, somewhere around there, he came to me privately and was like, what do you think about this idea? Is it possible? Maybe there's a cut in there. Maybe we do like 2 kind of segments. And I said to him, like, let's just see if you can make it into one. Let's put it together. And that's when we started kind of walking through the space. We built Mr. Beef, which is the original location in Chicago, on stage. So we had the entire facility designed for these kind of opportunities. And we had a blocking pattern down. We wanted to make sure the camera moved with somebody at all times. It was always being handed off. There was no unmotivated camera moves, which would ultimately take the viewers away from the oneer. And I think, even us as the filmmakers on set watching it, we didn't realize it was a oneer until 8 or 9 minutes in as well. And I think that's when we realized it worked. And so, we spent a day of rehearsals on set with the cast, running through the space, blocking it out, letting them build up their speed. And Chris is the creator or director, wanted a large amount of phonetic energy happening, really getting them to that top level. And they got there by the end of the rehearsal day. So when we came back in on day 2 to film, first take, we never even rehearsed it with a camera the day prior. It was always on iPhones. It was always just walking through the space. And so on that first day of principal for episode 7, the first take was Chris likes to call, he circled it. He was ready. He said that was airable. And we did 4 more. We did 5 total and went to lunch, and we're done.
Wow. So was the first one the one that he actually used in the show then?
No, I think it's number 4. I think 4 is where he got happy. There's some happy accidents in 4, like the Jardiniere spilled, which was in the end shot of Carmy on the ground picking up the donut. You could see that Jardiniere all over the ground. Like there's some nice moments that added to the character of that take. But it is a true oneer, which is what we're really proud of. And it was a testament to really my focus puller who could keep that thing in focus the whole time. It was on a 50mm lens, handheld, large format, flying through the space. He's throwing focus to dialogue. It's an unbelievable task at hand that I don't think many people in our business could have achieved. And Matt Rosick is a true genius as a focus puller.
It's remarkable, and that it's so funny you mentioned like the spill there, because rewatching it again, like when he kneels down to pick up donut, I was like, wow, that's so perfectly placed there, and like what a great thing. And it's just another like that. It's a happy accident is really remarkable because it looks so perfect. With the thing, the other thing I was like kind of watching it is like there's so for every, I mean, to do this, and I think the penultimate episode is also such a, I don't even like such a Herculean task because there's so many different moments that need to hit performance wise and acting wise for the cast and for the characters that will spring them into the finale, right? Like so much comes to a head in this episode. And even though it's a wonder, you have these great, like, I guess, still moments, right? With each of the actors and like kind of like these conversations and stuff.
Yeah.
When that's happening, then what's going on like off? Like I kept being like, how are you like, how much preparation is we're not seeing, right? Like, I mean, obviously that's like
Totally.
maybe, right? But like how much is like, are you moving walls around? Like, how is it like, what is happening? Like when you're just sitting there?
No, I mean, it's that set, that stage we designed from day one to be lit 360, all practical base. We never put a single C-stand on the floor. Everything was being lit through the windows on the outside. Everything on the inside was full RGB. My gaffer and my dimming board op were live grading the lights throughout the entire wonder, so they would be shaping backgrounds, and they'd be shaping the key, so wherever we landed they could bring down certain parts. It was a Herculean effort by so many people to make it feel as live and real as possible. My camera operator, Gary Maloof, is truly one of my closest friends. He's done every single project of mine. And, he had that thing on his shoulder. He did it for 20 something minutes. He did it 5 times, and every single time got better. And, those are the kind of accomplishments that I'm very proud of. Luckily he was recognized for it by the SOC this last year as an Operator of the Year nominee. And, it is a beautiful dance that he never misses a frame. He constantly finds the right person to pull them to the next scene, if you want to call it. And he always found a tail or a trail to get going. And it was perfect.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Do you have like, I mean, when you were in the, like, was there a moment, I guess, like you mentioned, like you guys were watching and like not even like you guys not realizing it's like one or within like the first 8 minutes or so, right? Like, was there a moment though when like even before in the like rehearsal process was that you were like, yes, this will really work, I guess? Or like, would you ever like, oh my gosh, like what if this doesn't work? Like,
no, I mean, I truly did not believe it. I don't think any of us believed it until halfway through that first take on our shooting day. And, at that point we were committed. We didn't have time in our schedule to shoot these scenes. We made that commitment to put the time into those rehearsal days. We took 3 of our 4.5 days to shoot an episode to prep for this. And, we didn't know it was going to work. And so, the amazing experience that we all got to experience, to feel at the end of each take was that, 100 people who made it happen, plus the actors all cheered after every take. And it was this, eruption of celebration at the end of each time we did it. With following a mad rush to reset the set as fast as they could with real food, and get the kitchen back to its moment before the lunch rush. And again, it's props and art, and our food stylists, and our chefs, our culinary chefs, and all these people that got that space ready as well. It was amazing.
Did you have, like you mentioned like before, like for the opening, like how like the John Hughes, Michael Mann style of Chicago, for like obviously there's like a lot of famous wonders, but I mean this does feel really unique because of the closeness of the quarters and the closeness of space. But were there stuff that you were like looking back to or like thinking of like while you were kind of concepting it, I guess?
Honestly, not really. I mean, we had a general theme to what we wanted the season 1 of The Bear to feel like, and it was always kind of like, well, make it more Michael Mann or make it more Martin Scorsese. It was always that phonetic energy. It was the combination of the big, huge zooms crashing into scenes with, kind of the flying of the camera on a prime through the space of, Scorsese. So it's kind of like this very mix of the two filmmakers that we both really love and admire. And the two styles meshed so well together. And, we kind of treated this show as the A camera was its own unit, B camera was its own unit. And they had different responsibilities, whether the director wanted to, you know, choreograph and design a scene to live on the movement of A, or he wanted to use kind of the crashing zooms and intercuts of what B was giving us. And it was a really beautiful kind of ballet between those two camera operators.
Yeah. We have to wrap up here, Drew, but last thing would be like, do you even like, can you even top that for season 2? Like, how do you even like think about that or anything? Like,
yeah, no, trust me, we
there?
just wrapped season 2, and I think people are in for a treat.
Okay.
It's we went for it.
Good. That's good to know. Drew Wehde, the Bear, cinematography. You watch all the episodes on Hulu, and the new season premieres in June. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Better Call Saul cinematographer Marshall Adams. Marshall, thank you so much for doing this. Just broadly, I want what was you've been with Better Call Saul since I think season 3. What was your approach, or how did your approach, I guess, evolve going into this final season from, you know, like when you joined the show?
Well, we had a lot of challenges, you know, I mean, obviously with the COVID challenges. I mean, we did this a year and a half ago almost when we wrapped. But they just upped the show. I mean, I alternated with my operator moved up, so he shot, Paul Donahue shot the other, you know, like even episodes. But we really had challenges. You know, they doubled the number of days we had per episode. They, you know, did crazy things like inside the oil tanker and you know, all kinds of crazy stuff. So it was exciting. It was a completely different approach, but you know, we really wanted to kind of up the game for the final season, you know.
Yeah, I think you did. I want to talk a lot about the finale, obviously, and it's just incredible. You mentioned like the closed quarters. I mean, like even the opening of the finale, we have like you know, Gene, I guess at that point in the dumpster. I just found that shot so incredible, like just even starting there. And I was like, how are they even doing this? I guess, like, you know, like, can you talk a little about like that and like kind of like, I guess, yeah, starting there, like at the start of that, like that early stages of the finale there, and like that shot specifically, I thought was so cool and not something like I'd seen before, where you're in the dumpster with him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it actually starts when we're at his apartment and we pan over from the police and see him climbing out the window, and we start the chase with him through the helicopter and the train tunnel that's, you know, here in Albuquerque. So we yeah, I mean, that actually was on stage, if you can believe it. That, you know, they built that dumpster actually, I think, for season 2. And they've had it floating around ever since. But so, you know, we were able to kind of control everything for that particular sequence. But, you know, the alleyway, I mean, all the snow that they added, you know, you can imagine the logistics were just enormous, not to mention going into a maximum security prison. So, you know, there's always that.
So you end there in the prison, obviously, and like you have the final, like kind of the 2 last scenes with Bob and Ray, obviously, and when they were in the jail, right, in that prison scene, it's just absolutely gorgeous in the way you're kind of lighting it, and I just found that whole thing just unbelievable looking. And you know, there's obviously so much there between those 2 characters, because that's like coming back together after all this time. But I guess, like, can you talk about like how you kind of approached that last scene of them together inside the jail before we see them obviously apart outside? But like, I especially the lighting and like kind of, yeah, just like it looks so like so film noir and like kind of like really gorgeous. I just was like kind of like, I just would love to hear you kind of how you approach that whole sequence there with them.
Well, I had the good fortune, you know, they established the black and white for any of the Gene time period stuff from the very beginning. So, which meant we ended up shooting the last 4 episodes of the season pretty much all in black and white. But that was a big one, because, you know, there's smoking has been a reoccurring thing that actually started with Arthur Albert, I think in season 1, where they're smoking down in the parking garage. And it had a particular kind of style of light that I wanted to kind of come back to and revisit it. And so the set kind of lent itself. I worked with Denise Pizzini, our production designer, and placement of the windows and kind of how that set was going to kind of come together, so that I could emulate that lighting style again, kind of revisit it, but in black and white, and pay homage to the whole thing from the beginning, you know.
And then how about like just the performances too? Because there's so much there that's like obviously that they're not saying. And I guess, I mean, like, no kidding that like Bob and Ray are incredible actors, but I guess like how do you work with them there? And especially at the end, like obviously this is the end of the series, but like, I guess like, you know, are you still constantly surprised by what they're able to do with those characters, even like at the end there and those last sequences together, I guess? Yeah.
All the time, all the time. Those two, especially together, are just so good. I mean, just their chemistry has really developed over time, and to watch them work off of each other. They actually live in the same house when they're here in Albuquerque, and they rehearse on the weekends. I mean, they're really deeply invested. There's that, and that actually was the last scene that we did. And that was the one that sent us home forever. So it was kind of cool to be able to do that, as the last thing.
Wow, that's amazing. What was it like when they called cut there? I mean, it had to be pretty emotional sequence there, I guess.
It was pretty emotional. As you can imagine, they both wanted to thank the crew, and that turned into half an hour of just talking about how great it was, what an experience it was for all of us, and how spoiled we feel, having had this experience, and how great it was. It kind of ruined us for the rest of the business in some ways. But anyway,
I want to ask you about earlier in the episode. There's two scenes, obviously, where Saul, Jimmy, is negotiating with the police, for his plea deal, right? And he's in full Saul mode in that sequence. And then later in the courtroom, when he's standing up in front of the judge, he starts in Saul mode and becomes Jimmy again, right? And I guess I was wondering, watching, I was like, did you view them differently, and how did you shoot, Bob as Saul versus Bob as Jimmy? Was that something that you thought about, how when he's when he's affecting the persona, basically, did you shoot him differently or think about it differently?
We did. We made a conscious effort actually to that scene was, I don't know, whatever it was, 15 pages long. I mean, we shot it over, I think, 3 days, because we were actually in a real courthouse in Albuquerque, that one that we'd never been in before. So it was a little touchy, and with all the COVID restrictions, blah blah blah. But it was. We made a conscious effort to kind of be a little bit lower and wider on Saul, kind of how we had been throughout the series. And as Jimmy kind of took over, we went a lot longer and kind of raised the camera and made it kind of more personal. So yeah, there was definitely a conscious effort to kind of separate the two.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because it's it's almost imperceptible, right, for the viewer, but you do feel even watching, you feel like something is different here, we're approaching it differently, and it's not just the performance. I think it's the whole thing. It's really, really cool. That the courtroom scene, you have two great shots I wanted to ask you about. You have Kim in the back, obviously, and there's one quick shot of her foot just kind of nervously shaking, and I just thought that was so great. And I'm assuming that was in the script, but can you talk or was that something that you kind of were oh, we could catch this, I guess, and then how do you think about that for her character? Yeah.
That was actually Peter's idea from the beginning. It was on his shot list right from the beginning. He wrote and directed. We had the good fortune of having a lot of the writers actually direct their episodes, so which makes a big difference. I mean, they know these beats inside and out, and the storytelling that they want to tell. Especially since that final episode was Peter Gould, our showrunner. So anything he wanted to do, he could do, obviously. But yeah, no, and that courtroom lent itself to some really, really fun stuff. One of the shots that I remember that we found was that the one with a kind of looks like a scope cross in front of her. That was actually the railing that was in that courtroom, and we just discovered that. It was such a kind of a callback to what everybody was assuming, that she wasn't going to survive the show. Everybody was talking about, how could we possibly kill Kim, so anyway, it was nice to kind of pay homage to that, but also kind of laugh about it,
That's really cool. You also there's a great shot of the exit sign, I think, right? At one point, from shooting from behind that, which I just loved. I thought that was so cool. And it's such a great perspective shift, obviously, because we've been so close on Jimmy and Saul in that sequence. So to pop it back out, I thought was really cool as well.
Yeah, again, that was Peter. That was actually, he'd written it in. That was a callback to Chuck too. Back in Chuck's demise was all in a courtroom, and in that great beat where we go back and hold that exit sign, and he starts to freak out about the electricity. So yeah, no, we have such gifted writers, and it makes it so much easier when you have it on the page, that it just makes it so much fun, especially with people like Vince and Peter, who really let everybody bring their best game, do their bring their ideas and try things out, take risks, and I never really worry that much about it. So.
No, yeah, it's an incredible show, obviously, and a testament because of how beloved it is. I guess, like, lads, you've been a part of like the Breaking Bad like universe or whatever so many years now, like, and you've done so much incredible work. Like, what for you makes like a great shot of this like world, right? Like that you guys have created. Like, what makes up a great shot here? I guess for this.
Boy, it's, they're all so different, different approaches. I always come back to episode 3 of this last season with the oil tanker. I had, they had to build that tank special, the interior of it special for us on stage, so that we could get a crane in that could go all the way across with a periscope lens on right at the surface of the oil. That was a great sequence that I'll always remember. But just sometimes you just got to know to get out of your own way. It's when Ray and Bob are doing their thing, and we're talking about shots that could be interesting or more exciting. It always has to come back to the storytelling, and so that's sometimes you got to go. Let's let them play out the scene and get out of our own way and not try to overdo it too much. So that's also a challenge sometimes.
Yeah. Marshall Adams, Better Call Saul, cinematographer. Thank you so much for doing this.
You betcha. Nice meeting you. Thank you.
Blackbird cinematographer Natalie Kingston. Natalie, I read interviews with Dennis Lehane, the creator and showrunner, and he said what drew him to Blackbird was that it was a way for him to interrogate like the male gaze, obviously. And like, I guess, so how did that kind of like inform your decisions on the cinematography?
Yeah, that was definitely the crux of it. And, wanting to explore the sort of dark depths of toxic masculinity, and Dennis wanted to really create and maintain a sort of like palpable sense of tension throughout, especially as we get deeper and deeper into Jimmy and Larry's very weird and uncomfortable relationship. So it was, transferring that feeling of tension and being just uncomfortable in the confines of prison, to the audience where they're hopefully sitting on the edges of their seats. And so for me, that was playing a lot with invisible camera work, not letting the camera, I mean, you never want camera to upstage performance or story, but just really, that meant embracing a lot of stillness, especially because we're inside their conversations a lot, in the cell blocks. And so, sometimes that meant just, embracing static frames, or just, creating movement that felt very, very just subdued and very just blended in, whether that's slow push-ins or tracking around or what have you. But it was really supposed to feel subconscious. And when we moved the camera, it definitely meant something. So that was the general direction of things.
Yeah. The third episode is Hand to Mouth. That's when they kind of like, we get Jimmy and Larry together for the first time, obviously in jail and stuff. And I guess how did you their first interaction, I guess, how did you kind of was it like that approach, or how did you think about the first conversation they had together, which I think is really Larry kind of blowing Jimmy off, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. Right? They're both in the pill line to get their medicine. And so it was kind of cat and mouse, and Jimmy's trying to not be too desperate and to blow his cover. But also time is of the essence, and he, has to help catch this dude. So it was sort of that was all shot in basically 2 angles on a Steadicam, as they're constantly moving in line. And so it's just, and that was sort of to emulate, Jimmy's chase to get to sort of capture Larry and get to, try to form some kind of fake but seemingly genuine relationship. So it was just kind of the camera movement was just really motivated by their action. It was kind of stopping and starting in line, stopping and starting. And then he kind of had him for a second, he thinks he's into it, and then he just blows him off again. So it's that sort of rhythm in the camera work as well for that.
Yeah. And you mentioned the performances obviously are incredible. And at the end of this episode, we have that, it's absolutely it's really almost hard to watch, but it's impossible to look away, is the scene where they're, Larry and Jimmy are talking openly about sexual assault that they've committed, right? And Jimmy kind of tells this story where I don't know, you like the audience, you're not even, is he telling the truth in that aspect of it, right? About like, committing like date rape, or is he just saying that? And it's just the way you're kind of holding on Taran's performance is just incredible. And I guess like, yeah, how did you kind of interpret that? And how did you guys talk about that whole sequence? Because I just found it's absolutely fascinating. It's like truly, really one of the better scenes, I think, in the whole show, but it just is like.
Are you talking about the one in episode 5?
No, in episode 3, when they're talking at the end,
Okay,
and he's
in
like,
the boiler room.
oh, yeah, like you get like Jimmy is just talking, like he's like, Larry's talking about how he's never encountered a woman who was aroused.
Yeah.
And then Jimmy has to be like, well, yeah, I've had that kind of, and it just is so dark, and like, it's just a really incredible sequence. And I guess how'd you kind of approach that one?
And that was the first time that Jimmy sort of kind of pins him down and they get to really talking. Before that, he kind of shows off and takes up for him in the TV room where he gets in a fight, and kind of that was supposed to be like an act, like he, is taking up for him. But yeah, this is in the boiler room. This is kind of Larry's world where he works in prison. So he has a little bit of freedom here. So the scene kind of starts off lighter. They're casually, just chatting, and then they reach his kind of office area and sit down. And yeah, the conversation just takes a turn in a very dark place and very unexpected place. So the angles start in more, the camera's a little further back at first, and then we're covering Jimmy and Larry in more profiles. And as it gets just more uncomfortable and more awkward and darker, we're right there just a few feet away from Jimmy and Larry, and on a wider focal length. And so the idea was just to really just immerse the audience inside that conversation, again creating that tension and sort of emulating what Jimmy's perspective felt like, of having to encounter this rapist, this murderer, and to try to pretend to be friends with him.
And how did you talk about with Paul and Taran, I guess, about the performances, and like how this, like you're saying, like the way you're moving the camera kind of like impact their performances? I feel like are so, because we're not being able to look away from those you know what I mean? Like it's just like kind of, so like, I guess, how did you guys talk about that, like working together as a group to get those performances, I guess?
I mean, it all just kind of just came naturally. I think we're all on the same page and aware that, there was a lot of dialogue, a lot of like sit down, intense conversations. And so it just, the blocking just kind of sort of organically kind of, we had an idea going into it. Sometimes it would steer in a slightly different direction, but most of the time it all just kind of fell into place. And, it was really like, I was trying to, by shooting in large format with a wider field of view and, with less depth of field, I was trying to create, almost like landscapes with these characters' faces. So the audience could really pick up on every nuanced expression, throughout these conversations. And you could really feel like you could sort of see, the idea was never to like paint Larry Hall in the picture that he is, like you condone his behavior by any means, but at certain times you see him as he is a monster, yes, but he's still a human being. And you start to see, throughout the series, you see that, this is, because of his childhood and the way he was raised and how whatever happened in his past and kind of what led him down this path. And you start to see slivers of a little bit of humanity, and you kind of empathize. Again, don't forgive it or condone it, but you definitely see the humanity come out. And that was important, and because it's not so black and white, these are all characters and human beings. So, and that's how, at moments you kind of feel like, okay, Jimmy and Larry are like, they're actually friends. They're getting along, and what's real and what, you have a lot of questions are raised.
Yeah, it's really great. And I think it's a testament to the performances that they're just like, so, I mean, like Taran, I think is really amazing. The other significant conversation we have in this episode is between Taran and his dad, or Jimmy, excuse me, and his dad, played by Ray Liotta, which I just thought those sequences are also incredible. And I couldn't help but think of like, obviously, like Ray Liotta's history as like in Goodfellas and all these different things, especially in those sequences, because it just is like, oh, kind of putting him back into familiar settings, let's say, from like stuff you like that people have really loved him as when he was, obviously alive. I guess, like, yeah, how did you guys, like, what was just generally like, what were those sequences like? And, working with Ray and getting obviously a different flavor of relationship between, Jimmy and his dad versus Jimmy and Larry.
Right. Yeah. And their relationship is very complex, because there are many things like you see in episode 1 that where we first meet Big Jim, that you see the complexities and just in imperfectness in their relationship and what Jimmy didn't receive as a child and what he's yearning for. But he loves his father so much. And that in that first episode we played, the first time we see them in that visitor's room, they're talking to each other through glass. And so we really played with a lot of reflections, that were naturally happening. But just, the idea of seeing Jimmy's reflection in Big Jim's shot, on his side of the glass was very interesting because they're very similar men. And I think that's a big reason why they, maybe didn't get along, didn't see eye to eye, but also very, very different. So it's just playing, with that juxtaposition. But as far, I think the chemistry and dynamic between Ray and Taryn was phenomenal from day one. And it was just really just exciting just to kind of sit back and watch their performances. It was quite inspiring. And Ray was just such an absolute genius and just an all around just filmmaker. He enjoyed staying on set while we were lighting and didn't really go back to his trailer and really just enjoyed the process of it all. And that was really cool to witness.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have like we have to wrap up, but do you have like a favorite, I guess, shot or sequence that you were like, wow, I'm really like, I'm really, really glad this kind of, we got this for the show, because it's hard to pick one, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I have a couple. It's, and because I shot the whole thing. So it's, there's stuff from every episode, but episode 5 is really special in the woodshop scene when Jimmy gets the confession from Larry. And we have a long take and, there's a lot of elements at play. It starts to rain and this, outside, and the lighting gets darker, and there's a very long camera move that has to be timed out. It's a long push in from a wider shot of Jimmy and Larry into a close-up just, a few feet away from Larry's face. And that was just really exciting to pull off, and I think came out very powerful. And then also I really loved the scene in episode 3 in the TV room when Jimmy's just, showing that he's willing to fight for Larry and take up for him. And I'm really happy with how that came out just all together. Just the lighting of that, I'm really happy with it. And the camera work and then just the intensity. It's a really tense, brutal scene.
Yeah. The show is, like you said, the show, the way you were able to build tension on the show is really, really remarkable. And I think it's great work. Natalie Kingston, cinematographer for Blackbird. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Star Trek Picard cinematographer Jon Joffin. Jon, thank you so much for doing this. Coming into the show for season 3, I guess, what was your, overall discussion and approach of how the visuals should look for this season?
It's first of all, thanks for having me. And it was a new approach because it's the final season, and things are getting very dark for certain reasons, and the ship is under attack. There's a darkness around. That's sort of the theme of the season. So they wanted the show to be much darker than it was before. And it was a bit tricky too, because you have fans who like go years and decades back and they're used to seeing the show a certain way. So it was a bit tricky coming in there and figuring out how dark to go and how far to push it. The other thing too was they talked about the show being the Star Trek Next Generation movie that never was. So Terry, the showrunner and writer, and he actually directed the last 2 episodes. Huge Star Trek fan. He really wanted to do justice to it, and he felt it should be like the last Star Trek feature film. So everything, the production design, everything about it was set out to be like a feature film. And the idea was to do a lot better shots, to do even fewer shots, but just to really have a real theatrical kind of feel. And that's sort of what we were going for. That was the marching order. Yeah.
That, I mean, that's really great, but it's like you said, like it sounds like a lot of difficulty to try and juggle, like you said, like the, you know, people have like a memory of obviously Next Generation or like kind of like how
Yeah.
Star Trek should look, and then versus like
Yeah.
doing all these things. So I guess like how did you find that sweet spot of how dark to go and like kind of like how to make it look exactly like it does, which is like you said, I think it's like obviously like a feature film. It does look like that. It looks like a Star Trek movie that we could have seen, you know, like, which is really cool.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, you know, when I met with them at first, what I said to them, and as a kid, I watched Star Trek Next Generation. I loved the show. I said to them, for me, and I started talking about Star Wars, and I said, when I saw Rogue One for the first time, it was the first Star Wars movie that felt real. The lighting was real. It felt fantastic, yet natural. And I wanted to push that I wanted to push it in that direction. I wanted softer, more gentle lighting. And I wanted it to feel real. So for example, at the end, when we end up in the Borg lair is typically green. Green is the color, but it's always been like a very theatrical kind of green. And we talked with Terry, and the production designer, and my gaffer, Len Levine, who's brilliant. And we talked about making it more of an industrial green, which felt more real to me. So I think once you make things, I mean, I know you're in space and it's a fantastical show, but the more you can ground it in reality, the more believable it is, and the more impact I think it's going to have. So that was sort of the way we pushed it. And then in terms of darkness, I think there's a way to make things dark but still see things. So you can have backgrounds that are darker, you can have enough light on actors' faces. So we set out to do a show that wasn't shot brightly and then just crushed down in color timing. We set to have this darker look where you could actually see things. And I've had some feedback where people feel that's what we achieved. So that was really rewarding to hear.
Yeah, not just because we're chatting, but I mean, like, it's noticeable because I've seen a lot of shows, and it's certainly a lot of spectacle FX shows where it's hard when you're watching it in your home with like the lights all on or whatever. It's hard to see sometimes because you're not.
Yeah.
But this, it's very, it is. You can tell that difference that you put into it. Then I think because it's
That's
easy,
great. That's
it
great.
does come through. Yeah, you mentioned
Yeah.
like being a fan of Next Generation, and like obviously like this season is really great. I know the fans were very excited about it. You bring back the Enterprise D, which is just awesome in episode 9. Yeah, I guess like how do you approach like shooting on the bridge in that sequence and like having the whole cast there? It's just a remarkable moment, I guess. Like, how did you kind of like think about how that should look? And again, like we said, like balancing the memories people have of watching that set and that setting versus like making it new for the show.
Yeah, that was definitely, I mean, that was a very special moment to stand on the bridge, because that set was built to the inch. Like it was an exact duplicate. And to stand on that set in the morning and watch the actors walk in, they'd spend all this time of their lives there, and it was a real high point for them. So to see them walk in and start tearing up, to see Patrick in tears, it was quite a special moment. So yeah, and then because we're dealing with a direct memory, that was tricky too with the lighting, because we wanted to maintain a rich sort of look. But what we did really was, the first time they're in the Enterprise, the lights all turn on. It's definitely, if you go back and you look at it, it's always very warm. So we really kept that warmth, and we did light it a little bit more bright than perhaps I felt it should have been, but it was the right thing to do, because here we are, we're back in our memory of how it was. But as it progressed, they were under attack and they were under battle. So we had the license to start turning lights off and getting a little bit darker and getting back towards the way the show was. So yeah, it was just it was a balancing act, that's for sure. So yeah.
And then how about, like you said, like getting, the other thing I think is great about that sequence when they're first like on the bridge again is like you have like individual shots almost of every actor and character reacting as characters, but also probably reacting as like you're bringing that baggage or that memory of like you said, like these actors have been on this show, or the memory of that is decades long, right? Like it's just like, and I just found that really fascinating. I guess, like, can you talk about like yeah, like getting those, like capturing those performances, like you said, like Patrick Stewart probably crying in real life, but also like as Jean-Luc, on the Enterprise, it's just is like a lot of like life and art commingling, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want to get in the way of it. We wanted to capture the moment, so we tried not to do anything that was too splashy or fancy. We just, you had this amazing production design, you have these amazing memories, you have these incredible performances. We just wanted to keep it pretty simple. So, we didn't really do anything fancy in the Enterprise. The Enterprise spoke for itself. The only thing that was a little bit fancy was the sequence where all the lights turn on, which was a fun thing to do. So yeah.
How about in general, getting like to work with Patrick here in as Jean-Luc Picard here, and like you said, like as a fan, like I guess like like what surprised you, I guess, or about that, or like how is he, like how is it capturing his performance? Is this iconic character and in this role, basically?
For sure. Well, I mean, the amazing thing is he's 80 years old and he's still doing it, and he's still got that magic. And when he speaks in that voice, he knows the character better than anyone else because he was the character. So luckily, Terry, the showrunner, really knows Star Trek too. So the script he wrote was really true to Patrick and to the character Picard. So yeah, it was amazing to see. It was amazing to see the performances. It's amazing to see the friendships. Jonathan Frakes, Gates, Marina, Worf. He was fantastic. Michael Dorn. Just that they have such a friendship. So just to be there and to see that all happening, and then I ended up bringing in another operator towards the end of the show, a gentleman named Chris Crossgrove. And he came in, and the guys told me that he had actually worked on Star Trek Next Gen. And he came into set, and when they all saw him, they lost their mind because he actually DP'd some of the Next Gen episodes. So having him there was really great. And it was really, what was really exciting too was having him there, and he had been there, but he was embracing the lighting we were doing on the show and how it had evolved. It was still the same. And that was really rewarding to see that and to have him there. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, I guess it's got to be rewarding too to have like, I mean, the fan response, I think, especially to like this third season, was like really remarkable. I know Star Trek fans who would like text me every week and be like, oh my, like just losing their minds over this show. And I guess, like you said, like kind of like really succeeding on that execution of like creating something that stands alone is new, but also like really does respect what came before.
The fans. Yeah. It was tough too, because it was almost a year before the show aired, and we had all these characters who showed up, and we had the Enterprise D, and we couldn't say anything. So it was it was definitely tricky. But yeah, so great to see people reacting so well to the show, because we put a lot of love into it. There were a lot of special moments on set. Every time a character came onto set, our first AD, Ian Caleb, who was fantastic, he would do such a great talk introducing the character, and it didn't feel like the typical show. It felt like family, because they were all family, and it felt really warm. So yeah, I was very lucky to be a part of it. I mean, myself as a teenager, I couldn't imagine that I'd be standing on the Enterprise D watching these actors walk in next to me, let alone being a part of it. So
yeah. No, that's awesome. We have to wrap up, but I just want to ask you, like, obviously, like you said, like you've been a fan of the show since you were a teenager, and then working on, I guess now with all that experience of both like practically working on Star Trek and being a fan of it, like what makes a great shot for a Star Trek, property, I guess. Like what is something that you would say like is like a quintessential need for a Star Trek shot?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think it's all, I honestly, like, as much as it's as a science fiction show and there's effects and there's things going on, it's really character based, and it's all about the characters. And I think just having a good close up on one of those performances is what really tells the story.
Yeah, definitely. Star Trek Picard cinematographer Jon Joffin, thank you so much, Jon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The Bear cinematographer Drew Wehde, Better Call Saul cinematographer Marshall Adams, Blackbird cinematographer Natalie Kingston, and Star Trek Picard cinematographer Jon Joffin. Thank you all so much for doing this. I wanted to start, I guess, like just right back at the beginnings for all of you. Like, when did you realize you wanted to become like a cinematographer, and like, what led you to this panel, basically? Drew, you could start with you and kind of go around.
Oh God, I have no idea. I don't know. I did commercials as a cinematographer for 10 years, and you know, things led me to Bo, and we made 8th grade, and I realized that long form is where I definitely feel most comfortable and most rewarding. And you know, I owe it all to Bo.
That's cool. And Marshall, how about you?
I came up in the industry as a technician, so actually started as a camera assistant, and was a terrible camera assistant. I realized that I just wasn't paying enough attention to the camera and was always watching what the electricians were doing. So eventually, I decided that's where I should be, and then kind of worked my way up. I think early on, you always have your own ideas about lighting and angles, and so the push to try to do your own stuff is always there.
Do you remember like what was something you saw, like you're like the first time or like an early time you're like, oh, I think this lighting would be great, or like that kind of thing? Like, can you go back to that granular or no?
You mean film influences?
Yeah. Like kind of.
Oh,
Yeah.
I would probably say Seven and Fight Club both, just blew me away. The lighting on both of those films was just fantastic, and that was a place to kind of, to head towards in my mind.
Yeah. Natalie, how about you? What made you want to become a cinematographer, I guess?
Yeah, so I had a very winding path. I'm from a small town in South Louisiana, so wasn't really exposed to filmmaking that much growing up, and didn't really watch movies too much as a child, and like my parents really didn't, so I didn't, by proxy. But I went to they did take me to the theater a lot to see musicals and plays, so I was a very creative child, so I was always like creating my own plays or own like little circuses. It was always like some kind of production. So when my parents, when I was like 10, they got the like a VHS camcorder, and so I got my hands on that. So I started, making little movies. I would take, I would have library books in the children's section of the library of stage plays, and I would, convert those to screenplays essentially, and make movies with the neighborhood friends and my cousins and stuff. And I just became absolutely infatuated with that concept of being behind the camera and telling a story. And of course, I had no idea what a cinematographer was. So it wasn't until, but that idea still stuck with me. So I guess that was the seed of just, being behind the camera, and then, cut to like me going to college and try to figure it out. I didn't go to film school, but I majored in mass communications because it's like the closest thing I could find. And then after that, just kind of, kind of fought my way in the dark of trying to like figure out how to get on a film set. And I got on a film set as a camera assistant and started to see like what a cinematographer did. And that's where it clicked. And so I just kind of started to shoot in my own shorts and stuff and anything I could, until people would pay me. And then the project slowly but surely got bigger. And cut to now.
Do you remember, like you were saying, like you didn't eat when you were younger, obviously, like didn't know like what cinematography was or whatever. Like, do you remember like the first time, like what was the first name or like first cinematographer you remember like being like, oh, that like a name, or like who you were like, oh, that's somebody, like that's what this person does, I guess?
Well, I guess it was like when I was like actively, I guess like the first, when I started to learn about cinematographers and who they were is when I bought a subscription to American Cinematographer magazine. So I don't remember like the first name, probably like Roger Deakins or somebody,
Sure.
Maybe Conrad Hall, or, and then, it was just like researching everything I could and reading everything I could. Yeah. And just becoming obsessed with lighting specifically, because that just felt very mysterious to me. Of how lighting worked and how you can use it to make an audience feel a certain way and manipulate.
John, how about you? What was your track to here, I guess?
Yeah, well, my father was a photographer, and he taught me how to work in a darkroom. So when I was, by the age of 13, I was working in the darkroom and printing and looking at all his photography books, which was a great education. And I grew up in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and we actually didn't have TV. We didn't have TV till I turned 13. So we used to go, instead of a video rental store, it was a 16 mil film rental store. We had a Bell and Howell projector, and we would rent TV shows, and we would have every Friday people would come over and we'd hang out and watch movies. So I had that sort of weird introduction. But I think what I've loved photography, but I think what the spark for me was when I saw Apocalypse Now. The film just floored me, and I think it was the way it made me feel, and the emotions it brought out in me, and how it was so powerful that a film could make me feel that way. And I think that's what made me want to become a cinematographer. That's sort of the backstory.
Nice, good pick there. Now, I guess if someone was coming up to you guys and like was like a budding, like an up and coming cinematographer, or somebody who was interested in this field, like what advice would you give them at this point? Drew, what would you tell someone who came up to you and was like, I love your work, I want to be a cinematographer, what is something I should know or need to know, I guess? Like, what would you say?
A really tough question, because
I'm just killing you. I'm sorry.
You are killing me on these. Well, I mean, I came up doing a lot of photography, so I think it's really just self-exploration through, doing your own work and trying to understand what you like and don't like. It's a tough business. I've gone through the hard ways, as a lot of us have. And I think it's just consistently trying to push your work and meeting people is one part of it. But I also think constantly trying to learn through shooting is going to be another part of it. No one really can teach you exactly what to do, because we all do it very differently. And I think that's kind of what I've learned over the years, is that, even the four of us here, we all would probably shoot the same scene extremely differently and approach it very differently, maybe possibly the same outcome. There's no real rhyme or reason behind what we do, and most of it doesn't make any sense to anyone else. So, the best advice I can say to somebody is just try to figure out what you like to do, and, how to get there is on your own path.
Yeah, that's great. That was really good. Sure. Marshall, how about you? What kind of advice would you give somebody who asked you?
Boy, that's a tough one. I think just to hang in there. First off, find somebody that you can team up with, that you really kind of see things similarly, but also learn from each other. Find somebody or a group of people that you love working with, and also just hang in there and keep doing it, because if I can make it, anybody can. Just keep at it. It's all subjective. There's no wrong way, and just go for it.
Yeah, Natalie, what would you say?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it really is all subjective, and understanding who you are as an artist, understanding your perspective and how that contributes to a film or a project. And I think that's just, just really getting to know yourself, like through, whether it's just taking stills and understanding how you see light, watching movies and understanding like why you like the things that you like, why you like certain types of art, why are you affected in the way that you are, why is the shot affecting you the way it is, and then how can you contribute as a cinematographer when you're collaborating with a director. I think knowing yourself is just, it's so important, and having that perspective, because we all are visual storytellers at the end of the day, and we have something to say. And I think the beautiful thing about filmmaking is all of these voices coming together to say something that we couldn't say on our own. So yeah, and it's in that that perspective just continues to evolve as you get older, you have more experiences, as your tastes shift. So just like constantly checking in and understanding where you're creating from.
Yeah, that's really cool. And John, how about you?
Well, I think it's really important to have a voice and to go in with your own ideas. But the one thing that I've learned is really to listen to other people, listen to what other people are saying. Sometimes you can go into a situation and you think, I'm going to shoot the scene this way and I'm going to light it exactly this way. But if you listen to what your director is saying to you, like often he's seeing it from a different way. And I'm not saying don't always take everyone else's opinion, but consider it. And I think a lot of times other people, I've gotten great ideas from a PA or an electric, and it's just good to be confident, but roll with all the ideas that are given to you. I think it's basically be open to ideas, and be open to doing something that wasn't exactly the way you thought you should do it. I think that's the best advice I can give. I don't know if it's good advice, but that's what I would give.
It sounds good to me. I just want to thank you all. We're going to wrap up here, but I just want to thank you all for doing this. And again, Drew Wehde, cinematographer for The Bear, Marshall Adams, cinematographer for Better Call Saul, Natalie Kingston, cinematographer for Blackbird, and Jon Joffin, cinematographer for Star Trek Picard. All of these shows, incredible and really great work here. And it was a pleasure getting to chat with you about all of this. It was really fun. So thank you so much.